Hi guys, my name is Alex. I am here to talk to you today about how to study for human physiology, how to take exams, as those are the two I'd say most different parts about this class because you've taken exams before, you've studied for classes before, but in this class, those two things are very different than any of the other classes. You guys are probably wondering who I am. I was an OU student. I just graduated in May 2014. I was a PLA for 3 years. If you don't know what a PLA is a tutor. They work over at Wagner Hall, and they're there to help you with, test-taking strategies, studying strategies, helping you get back on track if you're off track, helping you with difficult concepts, things like that. They're there during action centers and action appointments, so I'd definitely recommend taking advantage of those because they're really good. It's a little shameless plug there, but uh, I graduated, yeah, like I said, in this past May. I am now in Houston. You can't really tell by my blinds. I'm not letting you see the view, but I'm in Houston at the Baylor College of Medicine. So yeah, I'm in medical school. So I know a lot of you guys are, pre-nursing, pre-PA, pre-PT, all that stuff. So you guys are kind of in the same realm. So I mean, I haven't gotten very far into medical school, but I will say that it's obvious that Dr. Ketchum's class, specifically Dr. Ketchum's human physiology class, is going to be tremendously useful. So I would say put a lot of effort into this class, and you'll get a lot out of it. It was easily my favorite class during college, and easily the most rewarding class. It was a class that kind of pushed me on my first steps to get into medicine. So you'll love it if you put a lot of effort into it, but if you don't, it can be pretty tough. But anyway, so yeah, so down to the nitty gritty. I want to kind of help you guys. Like I said, I have a lot of experience. I have 3 years experience tutoring. I've seen everything. I've seen so many Dr. Ketchum questions. I've seen so many of her exams, and so I kind of have a good feel generally of what she kind of wants you guys to know, and how she would like, or how she tests, and then how she recommends you study, and what worked for me. So let's get started. So first, I want to just talk about studying. So studying, like I said, in this class is very different than any class that you've taken before. A lot of the other classes that you've taken, all you had to do is just memorize a bunch of terms, or even memorize definitions, memorize pathways, memorize whatever. And in every class in human physiology, there's definitely some memorization as well. I mean, you will have to memorize certain things. That's how you take a test. You take from your memory, but memorization in this class by itself is not sufficient at all. This class goes a lot deeper. If you guys have taken anatomy, I would highly discourage taking the same approach, because anatomy really is a lot of memorization. I mean, there's some application, but it's mostly memorization. In human physiology, it's about the function, it's about the pathway, it's about learning how things work, and you can't really memorize that. It's like if there's 4 different steps to a process, you can't just memorize step 3. You have to memorize how step 3 relates to step 2 and step 4. Otherwise, you won't understand the whole idea, which is what she'll test you over. So I would make sure that you, as you're studying, as you go through these things, look for like pathways. Look for the big, if you stick in her notes or her lecture videos, pathways of any sorts or mechanisms. Those are things she likes you guys to know, because they involve really deep functionality and involve you knowing pathways instead of just memorizing terms. So that's the first tip I'll give you. Rote memorization is not good. So kind of just shake that off immediately, because you don't want to get a couple tests in and then shake it off. You want to shake it off immediately. So make sure you get deeper in the material. But I would say the biggest thing to do is to engage in what's called active learning. And you guys might have heard about this before, but this class is all about active learning. It's like the definition of active learning is what you have to do to study for this class. So there's different ways you could do this. You can make concept maps. You could self-quiz. You could teach others. You can make flashcards. Anything that's making your brain actively engage the material. If you, I know you guys have a lot of required readings, and those are crucial to get that initial dose of information. But if that's all you rely on, your brain's not struggling to grasp the information, so it's much less likely to hold on to it. In order to help you keep that information in your brain much more firmly, you have to sort of make your brain grasp at understanding it. And the only way you can do that is to quiz yourself, make your brain struggle, make your brain try to seek that answer out. And that's the best way, in my opinion, to learn. I'll tell you a lot of things here, and some of them I'll say, definitely do whatever works for you. But in terms of active learning, I think this is a must. If you don't engage in active learning, you're going to have a very hard time in this class. So I mentioned self-quizzing. Self-quizzing, they did some research recently, past few years, where they studied different test-taking habits and then they matched them up to the outcomes on exams. And self-quizzing was by far and away the best way, had the best, most positive effect on exam grades of students, because students are challenging their brains, challenging them to recall questions. And in truth, that's what you're doing on the exam. I mean, you don't have your book on the exam, so why would you have your book when you're studying? I mean, if you don't know the answer, of course, you got to look it up in the book, but I mean, try to get your brain into the environment of a test as much as you can. And self-quizzing is doing that. Self-quizzing is challenging your brain, asking your brain questions just like it's asked on the exam. So anything you can do like that. Concept maps are really good for sort of connecting topics and things like that. Teaching others is wonderful because you find out things that you find out if you really know something. If you know it really, really well, you can teach others. But if you don't know it really, really well, you'll find you'll have a lot of difficulty teaching others. And a lot of times, if you teach others, they can point out things that you didn't know that you didn't know. So that's really useful. I would say the way I studied was I would look at a lecture slide. So yours guys is a little bit different because you got lecture videos, but I would look at a lecture slide or a topic head. I would look at a topic, and I would try to think without looking at the rest of the slide about as much information as I can about that topic. So if we talked about arteries, I would just kind of go off and just see how much I could branch off into on my own without looking about arteries. So I would think about, okay, so arteries are a pressure reservoir. They are the earliest parts of the blood vessel, the vasculature. They are the ones that kind of squeeze the blood down initially to continue on the circulatory system. They have a lot of smooth muscle, things like that. And then you talk about they have a lot of smooth muscle, and then I'd go to how smooth muscle works, and then I'd go to on and on and on. You'll learn all about this as you go. But the point is that you are able to sort of force your brain to recall this information just like it has to do on a test. So that's kind of how I studied, forcing my brain to recall that information. And specifically, the way I did it was in a way called it was using a method called delayed repetition practice. And this is also a type of active learning. So delayed repetition practice is, let's say you see a pathway. So if you see a pathway, look at it, try to understand it, try to understand how each part relates to the other part. Memorize the names as you need to. So get an overall understanding of it, and then continue on in your notes, continue reviewing, continue looking at other stuff. 5 minutes later, think about it again. Okay, let's see if I can recall and write down that pathway. So see how far you can get writing down that pathway. If you can't get it all the way, if you miss a couple things, go back and see what you missed. Think about it, think about why you missed it, think about how that relates, how those parts relate to what you did know, and then continue studying. Okay, 15 minutes later, do the same thing. Try to go back, see how much you can get down without looking. If you miss some, go back. And keep doing that at increasing intervals. So do 15 minutes, and then do it 30 minutes, do it an hour, do it 3 hours later, do it at night, do it the next morning. It sounds crazy, but that's how there's so much stuff in this class that's really necessary. So I would highly recommend that. So delayed repetition practice is very good. I would also say you should engage in this really cool sounding word called metacognition. So what I would say is learn how you learn. So there are lots of different types of active learning. And you might be in the class and you will see some guy around you succeeding. He will, he'll have this certain study sort of method, and you might want to just jump on that. And you can try it, and I recommend that you try it. If yours is not working, but if it doesn't work for you, don't force it. Everybody's different. Everybody studies differently. I studied differently than a ton of people around me who still did well. So know how you learn. Know what your best method of learning is. Do you like to listen to videos? Do you like to look at notes? Do you like to write on paper? Do you like to have models in your hands and mess around with those? How do you like to learn? So be very cognizant of that, about the conditions, the time, the locations, the style, the different methodologies. What is the optimum setting for all of those things in which you learn? So I would recommend that, because I tried to force myself into a lot of other people's study habits at first, and it really didn't work. So bottom line, guys, active learning is like all those things I was just talking about: delayed repetition practice, self-quizzing, concept maps, teaching others, and sort of knowing yourself and the best active learning strategies for yourself. All those components of active learning are crucial. You can pick and choose. You don't have to do concept maps, or you don't have to teach others. You can maybe your thing is self-quizzing. That's fine. Just make sure that in some way you're making your brain strive to sort of earn that information, to grasp that information, and not just sort of reading passively. Some other tips outside of active learning, just generally for her class. Prioritize what she prioritizes. A lot of times, one of the biggest mistakes students make, I saw over the entirety of my 3 years tutoring, is that they try to deeply understand every little detail of every slide of every page of the book, a page of your reading. They try they try so hard to understand every little detail, and that's great. And I applaud curiosity. I applaud the desire to know more. But if you're trying to do well on this test, if you're trying to get what Dr. Ketchum is trying to get you to understand, you should prioritize what she prioritizes. So if she spends a lot of time in her lecture videos on a certain topic, on a certain slide, you know that she's going to be asking a lot of questions about that. If she just blows over a slide, just kind of mentions one thing about it, and then moves on, maybe one question, maybe zero, maybe two, I don't know, probably not very many, most likely. Those are your best bets. So try to focus on what's high yield, because there's so much information that if you spread yourself thin, so thin, to try to cover every little detail, you're going to lose the emphasis that you needed to put on those really high yield topics, and those high yield topics are often really complicated. So just whatever she spends a lot of time on, spend a lot of time on yourself. So that's kind of what my policy was. If she spent the most time on something, I'd spend the most time on something. And then if she spent the second most time on something else, I'd spend the second most time on something else, and so on and so forth. And that generally served me well, and I was very rarely surprised by a question on one of her tests. And whenever, like I said earlier, teaching each other and kind of working with each other is great. Another thing I would suggest is quizzing each other. A lot of people don't really feel comfortable doing this. I'm a by myself studier myself, so I understand that. But I did that in human physiology, and it worked beautifully. So making questions for each other, just get one or two other people. It doesn't have to be a bunch of people, just one or two other people. Make up questions for each other. Questions, that's the best way to do it, because sometimes other people have different perspectives and different ideas that you wouldn't have thought of, and so they make up these really good questions. And try to make up questions that are similar to the questions that Dr. Ketchum asks. Because, in Action Center and things like that, she'll have questions for you guys, or she'll make up questions. And those, this is the same person that's making your tests. So, try to notice trends in her questions. Try to, look at how deep she's trying to get you to go, and make up questions that are sort of similar to that. So a couple of things I would recommend that you not do. Some of these are obvious. Cramming. So cramming in other classes it works in some classes. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I crammed in some classes and it worked just fine. I'm with you, okay? But this is not the class to do it. I mean, I would argue that this class is, like I said, the most rewarding class I've taken, but it's also probably the most difficult. I'm not trying to scare you. I think if you get through this, you will literally think every other class that you take after this is just a breeze. I mean, you will. So don't let me scare you. But I'm just trying to say it's very hard. So cramming is very difficult to do and do well. You have to really spread out your studying. A lot of people ask me, I never pull an overnighter. I'll talk about this later, but I never pull overnighters, ever. In fact, on the nights before exams, I go to sleep at usually 9 o'clock. That's pretty early, and I know I'm like a grandpa, but I go to sleep at 9 o'clock. And people wonder why. They're like, yeah, I stayed up till like 1 o'clock. It's because I'm not cramming. I never crammed for that class. I made sure I spread out my studying so that the last day I had very little left to do. I felt very comfortable when I went to sleep with what I knew. And I could go to sleep, get a lot of rest, and have a lot of energy for my tests. So don't cram. I promise you it will not pay off. I promise you it will not. This class requires sacrifice. I know it sucks that you want to go out and do stuff. And you can definitely go out and do stuff. And you can have a ton of fun, hang out with your friends all the time. That's great. But this class requires a lot more than a normal class. You get a lot more out of it, but it requires a lot more. So just remember that you are going to have to spend a substantial amount of time in this class. Another thing that I would recommend that you not do is just read and reread and reread and reread your readings, your online readings in OpenStax. I would not recommend that because you remember that study that I talked about earlier? We talked about study methodologies that were most effective for exam taking. Well, the very bottom of the list, the top of the list was self-quizzing. The bottom of the list was rereading, because rereading, I'm not saying reading is bad. Reading is, like I said, great way to get the initial sort of information in, and a great way to check your facts, and a great way to get a deeper understanding of things. But rereading for studying purposes, your brain is not engaged. Your brain can easily tune it out. Your brain's not struggling to grasp the information because the information is just given to it. It doesn't have to practice the skill of recalling information. That's a skill that takes a lot of practice. So it doesn't have to practice that at all. It's given all the answers. It's kind of like that whole, you teach a man to fish, you feed him for life. But if you give a man a fish, I think I said that reverse. But if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day or whatever. So if you teach your brain, if your brain gets used to recalling a certain piece of information, it will be able to recall that consistently over long periods of time. And when it comes to test time, your brain will be able to recall it. But if your brain is given the information just by reading, it's not going to be able to grasp it. You need to have your brain practice test taking by quizzing it. Reading is not a way to do that because you're given the answers. Here's a huge mistake. Here is a crucial mistake that people make. When you're watching lecture videos and things like that, and you're going back over your reviewing, let's say you get to a certain slide and you fast forward past it because you're like, oh, I understand that, because after you read the slide, like let's say it's like how the heart pumps or something, or how I don't know, how allosteric regulation works, and you read through how allosteric regulation works, and you're like, okay, that makes sense. I know that. Moving on. Don't stop there. That is a crucial mistake, because just because you can understand it when you read something doesn't mean that you'll be able to recall it on a test. You can understand how it works when you read it, but if you can't independently, without looking at anything, say how it works without seeing any sort of help at all, then you don't know it. That's a general rule. If you can't very quickly come up with how, or the answer to something, or a pathway, or can't walk through a pathway without looking, you don't know it. So even if it makes perfect sense when you read the slide, if you can't pull that from your head, if you can't recall that without seeing the notes, then you need to get a deeper understanding. Make sure that self-quiz yourself, do the delayed repetition practice until you can recall it without looking. And then lastly, what not to do, I mentioned this earlier, don't just straight memorize everything. Connect things. Connect parts of a process. See how they relate together. I promise you it's so much easier to memorize, actually, if you think about it. like imagine that a pathway has parts A, B, C, D, and E. How hard is it to remember like what A is, what B is, what C is, what D is, what E is, and what they generally relate to if you try to memorize them independently? You're memorizing, 5 things. So you memorize 5 things. That's a lot more difficult than memorizing one pathway. If you memorize how they all fit together, you're memorizing one big thing instead of 5 little things that you could get confused with something else anywhere else in the text or anywhere else in the content. But if you have them as one unit in your brain, then it's much easier to memorize that. In the memory, that's actually how memory athletes do it. The memory athletes, and that's kind of nerdy, but they go to these competitions and they try to memorize all these things. How they do it is how they keep all this stuff in their mind for so long is they're able to tie concepts together, tie ideas together into like a big, almost kind of story in their mind. And by connecting the things in a row, it's much easier to memorize because you're memorizing one big continuous chain instead of individual pieces. So in this case, it's much easier to keep like pathways in your memory and mechanisms in your memory if you understand how all the pieces relate. Then it's actually, you just memorized all those little pieces and you didn't even know it because you just memorized a pathway. So don't just rote memorize every single thing. Some other factors, some other tips I would give, and I give this to all my students, and like none of them listen to it. And I know that you guys are probably not going to listen to it. I've accepted that, but I'm going to keep plugging it. Don't do overnighters. I said this earlier. Don't do overnighters. Please, 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 please. Trust me on this, okay? Just trust me. These tests are very fatiguing on your brain. They're very critical thinking, and even if you got so much studying done overnight, you're going to be so tired that, number one, you're not going to be able to remember the information that you studied last night, or probably you won't be able to remember a lot of the information you had down pat the day before because you're going to be so tired that you can't think, right? So, and then number two, you're going to be so tired that a lot of those critical thinking questions are going to drain you, and you're going to go slow, and you're not going to be able to finish the test on time. Because speed is a big deal in the test. So don't pull overnighters. Don't pull overnighters. Please, you will see what I mean. Your first overnighter, you're going to realize, or if you want to, you can experiment. If you don't believe me, experiment. Do an overnighter for one test, and then get a lot of sleep for the next test. You will do better on the second test. You will do better on the second test. Well, unless the second test is just harder content-wise, but you know what I mean. You'll feel better. You'll feel like you gave it a better shot. Okay, so some other factors. So sleep. Where do you study best? Do you study best at the library? Do you study best at home? Do you study best at a cafe? Where do you study and are least distracted and most productive? What time of day do you study best? Some people love to study in the morning. Some people love to study like 2 o'clock in the morning. I study in the late afternoon to evening. When time of day do you study best? Plan your study times around that. Make sure that you set aside good study time during your optimum study time for Phys. Because Phys really deserves it. This semester should be largely about Phys. I mean, I'm kind of biased, obviously, but this class is so hard that if you want to do well, you definitely need to put some effort into it. And like I said, I'm not trying to scare you. I know it is kind of scary. I was scared. I really was. I often show students an email I sent to Dr. Ketchum at the beginning of the semester where I was just like, I was petrified, and I was like, Dr. Ketchum, I'm going to fail this class. I don't know any of this stuff that we're supposed to have known already. What am I supposed to do? So, I was scared at first too, but I ended up doing really well because I did a lot of these things, and I got Dr. Ketchum's help and things like that. So I'm not trying to scare you. I am saying this class is very difficult. It's very rewarding, but it's very difficult. I keep reminding you, but so put this as a priority this semester as much as you can because it is very difficult. So try to make that time in your schedule during the optimum study time for this class. If you get distracted, there are a lot of apps on your computer, whether you have Chrome, whether you have Safari, it doesn't matter. Like Self-Control is an app I've heard of. I've heard I got some pretty good reviews from my friends. And Productivity Owl, things like that. They're like they lock down your distracting websites for a certain period of time every day. Like So if you wanted to like study 45 minutes and then take a 15-minute break, and then study 45 minutes, take a 15-minute break, during that 45 minutes you could block things like Netflix or Facebook or Twitter or whatever, things like that. Honestly, I highly recommend those. I mean, I know people just recommend those all the time, but I mean, it's a really good thing to kind of just take it out of your hands and prevent you from even being tempted. Also, exercise and good nutrition. I know this sounds weird, but you do a lot better when you're eating right and when you're exercising. You'll find that your brain's a lot quicker, a lot clearer. When I was studying for my MCAT, I ran like every day. I ate really, really well, and I noticed as I got closer to the MCAT and as I did more running and ate better, that I was thinking quicker. I was memorizing. My memory was better. It was just functioning much better. Your body's cleaner. You'll feel better. So definitely take care of yourself, because that will really damage you if you don't.